I think we are probably ready to get started. Um, Welcome, everybody, to today's webinar on the topic of solving the engagement crisis, the science behind great learning. Can't promise that we'll solve the engagement crisis today, but we will do our best to talk about some of the ways that we're at GT, we're addressing the engagement crisis and show some of the learning science behind our approach. If I could advance the slide, that would be great. Um, okay. Let me just make sure yep, I'm all set now. So today's agenda, we'll talk a little bit about what we mean by the engagement crisis and online learning. We'll talk about GT's approach to interactive content design and the learning science that informs our approach. And then we'll look at and demo a new feature we have that we're very excited about that we call learning activities. And we'll talk a bit more about those and show how those sort of showcase our approach to interactive content design. And then at the end of the webinar, there'll be time for a Q&A. So if you have questions while we're talking, just go ahead and put them in the chat. My colleague Anthony and Carla will be monitoring the chat, and we'll get to those questions at the end of the webinar. I think we'll spend about 45 minutes presenting and talking, and then save time for the Q&A after that. So just to introduce ourselves, I'm Greg Chappett. I have been at Gutenberg for about 2 years as the Director of Learning Design Innovation. I have a background in learning design at publishers, most recently at Wiley, at educational publishers, most recently in a similar role at Wiley. And I'll be presenting on the sort of learning design topics at the beginning of the webinar. Anthony, my colleague, is our UX UI director and art director. He'll be presenting in the second part of the webinar. He'll present his work on or our work on learning activities. One thing that's interesting, I think, about Anthony and me is that we design our content experiences together, sort of coming from my perspective, which is learning design, and Anthony's perspective, which is UX UI. So we will talk a little bit about how both learning design principles and UX UI principles inform our work. So just a little bit about Gutenberg, the company we work for. We are a content operating system with a learning content management system at the center of our ecosystem. It's an LCMS, learning content management system. We have an authoring tool for authoring e-learning, digital content, digital educational content, e-textbooks. Our authoring suite supports sort of a wide range of digital learning materials. We have a course builder, which is a transformation tool that turns static uh, materials, static learning or training content into modular interactive e-learning with AI. And then we also have an e-reader, which is sort of on the distribution end. We have a reading platform that allows for great, sort of experience reading and distributing the content that you make in our system. So we go from sort of authoring to content management all the way to an e-reader. And we have AI sort of built into all the different points in our ecosystem. And we're developing more and more AI like everybody else is. We are a company that's been around for, I want to say 15 years or so. And we have lots of partners, both in Europe. We're a French company. So some of the companies we work with are in France and in Europe, but we also work with major US publishers like Cengage and Wiley and National Geographic. So to get started talking a little bit about the engagement crisis, what do we mean by that? So we talk with a lot of customers in the L&D space, and we're hearing about problems with engagement. Customers come to us saying that their content is static. It's not being completed. They're seeing low completion rates. They're complaining that learners are sort of clicking through content without truly engaging with it. That their content looks like it has long reading passages and sort of traditional quizzes, and it's not encouraging engagement. We're hearing about this, but the numbers also support this. We're seeing completion rates as low as 20%, low with corporate e-learning courses, low learner satisfaction, and engagement rates are also being reported as low. So the engagement gap that we're talking about is a real thing. And it's costing organizations lots of money, as I'm sure you're aware, because learners aren't using the materials, they're not finishing it, etc. This is what a lot of the content that our customers come to us with. We call it walls of paragraphs, and this is essentially static long form reading content. Um, maybe broken up into sort of headings and sections, but it's essentially content that was developed for the print medium, and that's not optimized for digital delivery. That's just sort of sitting online, but not being used. And this is sort of at the heart of the problem that we're solving. So many of our customers come to us with content that looks like this. Legacy content that was, again, developed for print, that they don't know what to do with. How do I make content that looks like this into content that looks more like this? And this is content that we've developed in our system featuring interactives. So we're showing some different interaction types, carousels, accordions, flip cards. These are pretty basic interactions, but then we also have more complex activity types, like what we're seeing here, which is a sort of gamified multiple choice quiz and and other types of interactions here, scenario-based activities with flip cards, etc. So this is what we call at GT our sort of interactive content suite, which ranges from content interactions to more complex learning activities. And so we think this is a great way to address the engagement problem. We specialize in designing e-learning for active learning. It's very much our mission is about replacing passive content consumption with interactive experiences, whether that's through learning activities, which we're going to take a closer look at later in our webinar, content interactions like flip cards, accordions, tabs. Offer a variety of quizzes with different question types and different feedback mechanisms built into our quizzes. And then we also support pulling in and displaying sort of seamlessly video or audio or interactions that are built outside of our system, although we offer a variety of native authoring for interactions. Um, and so, what is the learning science behind interactive content? So, when we talk about um, designing interactive content and why we think this is good, and this is a good way to address the engagement problem. This is based on learning science. And so at GT, we've developed a framework for ensuring that the content, our content design reflects learning science. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about this framework and show how this framework informs our work on interactions. And then with each of in this, I'll also try and provide some tips that you can apply in your own work, whether that's developing content or developing courses or textbooks or whatever you might be working on. I actually think that a lot of these tips are also applicable outside of the learning world. So these are our four learning design pillars to maximize engagement and retention. Starting with a clear, purposeful structure. We take a lot of care to make sure that content is organized from simple to complex, that it's broken into bite-sized chunks. Um, our second pillar is active, engaging learning content. So as we're talking about in this webinar, we design interactive content. We're very committed to helping customers transform static into interactive content. Continuous practice and feedback. We find lots of ways to incorporate practice and feedback into learning experiences, and then make sure that everything that we design is simple and intuitive. This is sort of Anthony's role. Because it's super important in all of this that you don't have a UX, UI that interferes with learning. You want learners to be able to focus their energy on learning rather than sort of figuring out what to click on or figuring out how something works. So these pillars sort of represent the top level of our framework. And then underneath and supporting each of these pillars, we've curated a set of 70 learning design principles. So this is content that we'll provide as a handout following the webinar. But this is sort of the work. This guides all of our work here at GT, and it's sort of it becomes sort of a checklist or a rubric for us as we're designing things. We check against our learning design pillars to make sure that we're on track and to keep ourselves honest. And it gives us a way internally to talk about. It gives us sort of a vocabulary for talking about some of design decisions. And so there are. Can zoom in a little bit here, but there are learning design principles, 70 in total, that are relevant to our first pillar of structure. There's learning design principles that are guide our approach to designing interactive content, to designing practice and feedback. And then lastly, these are principles that guide our UX and UI. So this is work that we'll provide as follow-up to this webinar. But in this next section, we want to actually drill into some of about 6 of these learning design principles and talk specifically about how they have guided our work on designing interactions, guided our work on designing interactive content, and how we think that our interactive content reflects these sort of evidence-based learning design principles. So to that end, we'll get started looking at some of these learning design principles. So first, a principle is to promote active studying. So this principle is about when learners interact with content through clicks or selections or manipulations, they're actively processing rather than passively receiving information. Uh, the learning science supports that when you're interacting with static content, your mind tends to wander, but interactive content uh, demands attention and participation. So we think this is a great reason for interactive content, and obviously our interactive content is a great way to incorporate interaction and active studying to sort of combat this issue of passive learning. Trying to advance the slide. Sorry. There we go. So here are some best practices for designing active learning. And so first of all, that you hopefully you can use in your own work. So first of all, when you have categorical content, so content that is, sort of explaining organizational structures or topics or subtopics, a great way to make that content interactive is to transform it into accordion interactions. Um, if you have procedural information, so information that explains steps in a process or how something works, carousels are a great option for transforming that content and making that static content interactive. If you have key terms and definitions, flip cards are a great option for that. Flip cards sort of add a practice dimension. They encourage learners to sort of quiz themselves, to think harder before they see the answer, and they transform vocabulary review from passive reading into an active sort of retrieval practice activity. And then if you have worked examples, so sort of problem solving examples in your content, um, uh, explanations of how to solve a problem. Maybe there's a problem statement followed by a solution, followed by an answer. A great way to make that kind of content interactive is to convert it into a tabbed interactive. And we think that's a great option because it allows the learner to sort of focus on one step in the process at a time instead of seeing all the parts exposed at once. So again, it sort of turns the content into a bit of a sort of practice activity. Um, and here, issues. There we go. Here's just a quick example. This is a procedural explanation. So it's a step-by-step explanation of how to prepare for the night shift. And we're showing this content, which might traditionally, in a static product, be a numbered list or some kind of static explanation. A great way to make procedural information like this interactive is to turn it into a uh, a carousel like this. The next principle that has guided our work on interactives is incorporating memorable visual content. So there is a learning design principle that states that presenting content through both verbal and visual mediums creates stronger, more memorable mental models than either text alone or graphic material alone. So basically, what this means is it's a good thing to incorporate instructional graphics in your content. Um, this helps build richer, more robust mental models that are easier to recall and apply. Our interactive content is full of opportunities for incorporating instructional graphics. So, just some general best practices for incorporating graphics. It's important to use instructional graphics and to not overload content with decorative art. So, sort of getting at the difference between instructional versus decorative art. What works well and what's based on evidence is graphics like flowcharts or concept maps or timelines, cause and effect diagrams, that sort of thing, rather than filling instruction with, sort of decorative art with pretty pictures. There is a tendency, I think, for learning designers to think about putting, interesting but irrelevant images into learning materials. For example, I worked with an instructor once who wanted to put cartoons that they had drawn into their economics course. And there's a place for cartoons for sort of engagement and for creating positive vibes in content, but you have to be really careful with decorative art like that. It tends to overwhelm working memory. It distracts from the material that matters. So it's about finding a balance. Another best practice for incorporating graphics is to place text and graphics close to each other in the context of a page, a screen, an interactive element, etc. It takes extra cognitive or mental energy to sort of in your head make connections between the text and the relevant images. It's important to, and that sort of mental energy is not productive energy. That's taking learners away from the content that matters. So it's a best practice in layout design, in page design, and multimedia design to make sure that text and graphics that relate to each other are close to each other. And this is a good example of this. It's sort of a famous example where you have an explanation of how a braking system works, and on the left there is a graphic on top and a text explanation underneath. And on the right, you have the text explanation integrated into the relevant parts of the graphic. And learning science will say that that's the better approach to incorporating graphics. You want the relevant text and graphics to be close to each other like that. The next principle is about the importance of creating breaks and pauses in instruction. It's the segmenting principle is a learning design principle that states that breaking content into manageable segments improves learning and retention. And our interactions, our interactive content is full of opportunities to create pauses and breaks. Uh, Either by pulling interactions into longer text passages and breaking up text passages with interactions, or within the interactions themselves. Some of our interaction types, like accordions, are actually by design about breaking up content. Accordions break up, content into items, and then within the accordions, they break up items into level one information and then additional details that you can click into. So interactions by design or interactive content by design is all about breaking up content in this way that we know is good for learning. Some general learning design tips related to this are about organizing content into chunks. I'm sure everybody's familiar with the concept of chunking. Um, Progressive disclosure is another best practice. Using accordions or tabs or carousels to break up content and to expose that sort of higher level content first before revealing the next level of detail. Adding sort of reflective prompts or other quick assessment prompts into content to break it up. Gives learners time to sort of pause and consolidate their understanding before continuing. And then also just in general, aiming to keep reading passages, especially online reading passages, shorter. There is research that supports keeping specifically online reading passages shorter, and the value of that as compared to longer continuous passages. And here's a quick example that I grabbed just from a video. So this is showing on the left a video that is broken up into segments. So it's about a 20-minute video. And the video content itself is segmented. There's a sort of part one, part two, part three, and part four. But on the left, that those parts and that segmentation is built into the player itself. And on the right, it's not. It's sort of one longer continuous video. And research would tell us that on the left, breaking up the content in this way is actually the better way of designing a video experience. So I chose this video example because I think segmenting means a lot of different things, and it can apply to a sort of a wide variety of both static and interactive content types. Provide frequent low stakes practice. So our interactive types are all about very much all about incorporating practice. We have lots of different ways of our interactive types are provide lots of different ways to incorporate practice into content. So practice quizzes, knowledge checks. It's all about retrieval practice. Each time you attempt to recall information, even if you get it wrong, you're strengthening the memory trace, and that's a lot more effective than just sort of passively reading content or reading and rereading. Actually designing interactive practice and adding that to content is proven to be effective for learning. And our interactive content provides lots of opportunities for interactive practice. Just some basic tips and best practices for designing practice. It's important to distribute practice throughout modules. So spacing, it's called spaced or distributed practice, spacing practice out over time instead of sort of cramming or leaving all practice in one longer cram session. The science tells us that smaller spaced sessions is more effective. Um, uh, Designing or using question types that require effort is better than content like multiple choice or just relying fully on multiple choice or true false or other selection based question types. Although there's definitely a place for all types of questions, it's important to incorporate more effortful question types that require more work because more work is better for learning in general. It's important to incorporate different activity types. So using matching, sorting, flip cards, varied formats build a flexible understanding. In our interactive content, we have, and we'll take a closer look at this with our activity types or our learning activities. There are lots of different ways that we come at asking questions. We have different question types, and it's important to provide that variety. At the same time, it's important to, within the context of e-learning or within the context of a learning session, it's important to be consistent at the same time. So don't introduce or break, once you've introduced a learning convention, it's important to keep with that convention, not to change things up. Because changing things up and requiring learners to relearn and with each new session or whatever is mental effort that is not productive. It's not, it takes learners away from what's important. Uh, if a practice quiz in one module has 10 questions, the practice quiz in the next module should also have a similar structure and focus. And as I said, we'll take a look at our different activity types, but with our interactive content, we provided a wide range of question types and activity types that get at the same sort of content and concepts and skills in a variety of different ways. And then finally, actually, there's two more, so I'll be quick here. Provide immediate, encouraging feedback. So practice is important, but practice without feedback is not good. You want to incorporate you want to incorporate feedback into your practice sessions. And our interactive content is full of opportunities for feedback. We've designed feedback into most of the activity types. Feedback helps learners accurately gauge their understanding. There is a tendency for learners to be confident about what they know and what they don't know. Don't trust your intuition as a learner. That has been proven to not be accurate. So it's important to provide system provided feedback that sort of cuts through your intuitions and tells you how you're really doing. You'll receive immediate data about what you actually know versus what you think you know, and this metacognitive awareness allows you to adjust learning strategies in real time. And here is just some best practices for feedback. The importance of elaborative feedback and not just evaluative feedback. So not just so there's different kinds of feedback. Not just it's important to tell learners, explain to learners why they're wrong and how to move forward to a successful outcome rather than just telling them in an evaluative way that they're right or wrong. So there's sort of two types of feedback there. There's you got it right or wrong, and then here's why. And it's important to provide both types, to provide that sort of goal-oriented feedback that provides actionable guidance for improvement. It's important to write feedback with an encouraging tone. So use positive, encouraging language, celebrate effort and progress, even for incorrect responses. Immediate feedback is important. So the timing of the display of feedback is important. There are use cases for providing delayed feedback too, but in many cases, especially for practice contexts, delivering feedback immediately, allowing learners to see how they're doing, to course correct, is of great benefit. And then also within feedback, making sure to connect the feedback back to the bigger picture, to connect to learning objectives or overall course goals to reinforce the why behind the responses to deepen understanding. And here's a quick example of positive and encouraging feedback. I'm sure you've seen confetti. We use a lot of confetti in our interactive content design because it's encouraging. It's sort of it's motivating. It encourages good vibes. And then finally, the last one we'll cover is provide interesting challenges that promote a state of flow. Effective learning requires content that's aligned to a learner's ability, to their knowledge and abilities. You need to aim for sort of the sweet spot of difficulty and challenge that's neither too simple nor too challenging. Content needs to be appropriately leveled for your learners. We talk about how this encourages a state of flow, which is that sort of state of absorbed focus where challenge matches skill level, and time seems to disappear. And when that balance is achieved, learners stay engaged and motivated rather than becoming bored or anxious. And this is very much a guiding principle for our learning activities in particular. And Anthony will actually show a little bit of and talk a little bit about flow when he demos our learning activities. So some quick best practices here are designing brief and focused activities. So there's a lot of research sort of about appropriate durations for activities and videos. 3 to 10 minutes is probably a good sort of a guideline. Um, it's important to include progress indicators and to make sure that goals are expressed explicitly and are clear. All of our learning activities and interactive content incorporates things like goal statements, overviews, progress tracking mechanisms. These are all important to incorporate into learning content. And then also to vary formats strategically to sort of maintain novelty while also keeping sort of the pedagogical purpose consistent. And so we just took a close look at, I think, six of our guiding learning design principles. As follow-up to this webinar, we'll provide access to our learning design framework. So you'll get sort of the full set of 70 learning design principles that are organized into our 4 pillars. It'll cover what we just covered and a whole lot more. So with that being said, I think I'll switch presenters over to Anthony, who will take us through our exciting new learning activities, which I've mentioned are our new a new interactive content feature that we're very excited to show you.
Yep. Hi everyone, I'll do my best. I'm Anthony, GT's lead UX UI designer. I've been in charge of designing the learning activities, so I'm going to reveal basically the concept and process behind these new widgets. We can jump to the next slide, Greg. Thank you. When we started designing these learning activities, I wanted them to feel intuitive, playful, and visually engaging, something that invites you to explore. And of course, that raises another question, which is how do I do that? And the main challenge is how do you bring people to another place when you don't know where they're coming from?
Hmm.
So that's why I chose Galaxy-inspired theme to break away from the usual graphic guidelines. I knew that using bright colors with moving backgrounds would be a very good start, a solid start. The overall idea was to create a visual shift, a moment of surprise somehow that signals to the learners you've entered a different space, regardless of their company's graphic charter or visual identity. So basically picture it as a portal to another world
Hmm.
where learners can test and apply what they've learned so far. Uh, this design isn't meant to be merely decorative. It sets the tone for more immersive, let's say, curiosity-driven experience, one that feels like a journey and not a checklist. Uh, Thank you. Perfect. I'm not the one who first said that quote, take what I've read to another level. It was Rob, one of my colleagues at GT. I just thought this was so spot on that I decided to reuse it here because I think it's right. I don't want the learning experience to remain passive. On the contrary, I want it to evolve into active exploration. Learning is not just about absorbing content. I think Greg mentioned it a couple of slides earlier. It's about experiencing it, connecting it, and with it, and making it stick. So I basically want each interaction to feel like a meaningful step forward, where design supports understanding and curiosity is also rewarded. As you might have noticed, this is on a personal note. I'm French and I
Yeah.
learned to speak English on my own, even if it's still a bit approximate at times, I agree. Um, Here it is. I'm not saying that English teachers aren't good, but it's true that English classes were often a bit of a letdown. In France, when someone is mocking a person who can't properly speak English, they say Brian is in the kitchen, because that's basically the first sentence young students learn. And you must admit that this isn't very useful unless you happen to have a friend called Brian and who really loves cooking. So over the years, I've tried all sorts of tools, websites, private lessons, mobile apps, books, podcasts, series, of course, in the original language. And they helped a lot, but I felt it still wasn't enough. None of them really fulfilled my learning needs. So either the interface was frustrating or the features didn't match my needs or the overall level of the exercises just didn't align with where I was. So when I started designing this first screen, I sat down and asked myself, Anthony, what would you need? How would you want to customize your own exercises in terms of look and feel, of course, in terms of flow and experience? And that's basically how these learning activities came to life. They're a bit like my babies, a way to say the kind of tool that I wish I'd had a few years ago. Um, the most important thing is that our users really helped us improve these widgets, of course. Based on the surveys we sent out and their results, we were able to address the main issues learners encountered. We are going to jump to the next slide because we are not lingering on the theoretical approach, the what, but we are moving forward to the how. Uh, so we didn't just think about pedagogy, of course. We asked ourselves, how can we help learners instantly understand what to do, relying on instincts rather than on string instructions? So we know the words. How can they complete a game without reading any instructions? That's our goal. And it's a rhetorical question. We simply had to analyze our own digital habits. We looked at everyday life, the gestures and routines people already know by heart. And the more familiar the behavior, the more intuitive the learning becomes. As I said, the principle is simple. Don't reinvent the wheel. Borrow from what people already know and give it new meaning in a learning context. That's how we make activities instantly understandable. It's not about nostalgia, but about recognition. When learners recognize gesture, they feel at home, and that's exactly when learning flows. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about the very first learning activity, the swipe challenge. When we started thinking about new learning activities, well, basically my best friend had just become single. So we spent loads of time talking about the guys he was dating, the apps he was using, and all that. And then I realized everyone knows the swipe mechanism. We just need to reuse it. So instead of choosing a match, learners validate or reject statements. It's the same gesture, basically, but with a new meaning. So by reusing a familiar habit from everyday digital life, we lower the barrier to entry. So learners don't have to think about how to interact. They can just focus entirely on the content itself. As you can see, our users are asked to estimate the legitimacy of a statement by swiping left or right. And because we wanted to address accessibility needs, we also designed thumbs ups and thumbs down buttons to validate or invalidate the answer, but we'll get back to that later. The chat challenge now. This one was even easier. We all spend hours in messaging apps. That familiar chat bubble become our main inspiration. In the chat challenge, learners interact with simulated conversation, choosing the right response. You can showcase, I guess, the next. Perfect. Here it is. But I think that what surprised me the most with this one was the emoji. You're about to see it, that pops in as a reaction from the receiver to help people understand if their answer was correct or incorrect. Um, at first, I implemented it this a kind of a gimmick, a sort of winkish conception to make people smile. And in the end, this was probably the most appreciated feature. It feels natural. It mirrors what they already do every day, do and know every day. And finally, the last learning activity that I wanted to talk about was the stamps challenge. It's a bit more nostalgic, the act of sticking a stamp on a postcard. We turned that into a metaphor for categorization. Learners read a statement, choose the right stamp, and send the card, basically. It's a tactile cultural gesture that makes abstract learning concrete and, well, I guess, memorable. We're still working on this one, so you'll need to come back for another webinar to see it live. But in the meantime, here are some screenshots to give you an idea of how it will look. So on the second screen, you can see a statement. The sun is a star located, blah, blah, blah. Then you can click anywhere on the card, and then you're invited to choose a category from three options. And in the example, the user selected the popular belief category, and then you get to see whether your guess was correct or not. So in conclusion, I'd say when learners recognize a gesture, they feel at home, and that's when learning flows. You can jump to the next slide, Greg. Thank you. Building on that same principle of familiarity, we also introduced 9 badges, with 4 more coming in the next version, I guess, of the learning activities to boost gamification. Some badges reward players who achieve 100% correct answers, while others celebrate those who retry several times before reaching more than 90% correct, for example. So this way, everyone has a chance to be recognized for their participation, whether it's swiping, chatting, or stamping, even earning badges. The idea is always the same: borrow from what people already know, so learning feels natural. We are now heading into the last part of the webinar, sadly. One thing I want to highlight is that when content is truly accessible with good contrast, clear text, alternative formats, learners aren't distracted by the interface. So that helps a lot and can focus on what they actually meant to learn. We consider accessibility a powerful lever for creating inclusive, effective, and engaging learning experiences. We want everyone to be able to enjoy all the content our clients create or provide. Let's just know that, or not forget, that around 60% of the global population currently lives with various significant form of disability. And this is why we think that digital accessibility isn't a bonus, but a baseline. So my very first line is this. We are currently running some audits to assess our current level of accessibility. This ensures that our learning activities stay aligned with evolving accessibility standards, not just meeting the minimum, but anticipating future needs. You can jump to the very last slide, Greg. And in the next phase, we'll be conducting users testing with a wide range of profiles, including users with different abilities, of course, background and preferences, to help us validate design choices and maybe, hopefully, uncover areas for improvement. Now I think we've talked enough, so we want you to fully understand and experience these widgets. We thought you'd appreciate trying them out yourself, so feel free to scan this QR code. That will take you to the tap challenge. I hope you'll enjoy it as much as we enjoy designing it.
Mhm.
Thanks again for attending this meeting. Greg, do you want to add something maybe?
Well, I think that we it's have time for some questions. Anthony, are you able to see if there any questions have come in on the in the chat? Not
Yeah,
to
I can help you with that.
okay.
How much effort does it take to convert one chapter or module into learning activities? This is the very first question.
How much effort?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think an important point about our learning activities that maybe we didn't mention is that they are AI enabled. So basically, the way the authoring of the learning activities works is you highlight the content on within a page that you want the learning activities to align to. And the AI generates aligned activities that align to the content that you have selected. So basically, in terms of effort or authoring effort, they are generated by AI. So it is not there is not sort of a difference in effort whether you're making learning activities about smaller chunks of content or bigger passages. I would say that in general, I think the learning activities work best in content as sort of supplemental. I think we talked earlier about opportunities for breaking up longer text passages or sort of continuous learning content with things like our learning activities. Like they're a great way to sort of break up content, to introduce quick, low stakes practice throughout content. And they're not really meant to sort of replace content. They're meant to be more supplemental and more of a sort of practice component within content.
Thank you. And we have another question. How do you make sure this doesn't feel gimmicky and actually works for serious learning?
Right. So I do think that there is, a danger in making them seem too much like games. And maybe that's appropriate for. We actually talked about sort of, appropriate leveling before. Maybe in the current design is appropriate for less formal contexts or more younger potentially learners. I think that what we are intend to do with our next iteration of the learning activities is allow customers to reskin them. So take sort of the basic interactions that we've designed and adjust the look and feel to match their branding, or to match the sort of level of their learner if they feel like they're not leveled appropriately in terms of the look and feel. Next question. Is there?
I think that's it.
Okay.
We had one question, but I just replied.
Okay.
So yeah, we're good.
Okay, oh great. Okay. So I guess we're probably at the end of our webinar. Thank you so much for joining us. As follow-up, as we mentioned, we'll provide a couple things. We'll provide our handout on with all of our curated 70 curated learning design principles. So our learning pillars framework, which was sort of the basis for the first part of this webinar. And then we'll also provide a page where you can sign in to access a bunch more learning activities, so you could try out the different types that Anthony showed. So we'll be just look out for I guess it's an email as follow up. And feel free to reach out to any of us if any questions or if you want us to demo them for you. We'd be really happy to connect with you that way. Thank you very much from New York and from France. Okay. All right.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone. Bye.
Have a good day.